Okay, ladies and gentlemen, seats upright, seat belts fastened, blinds up, and prepare for landing. Because we're just about to land in Uzbekistan. There you'll see the map that many of you have picked up, the map of Central Asia, Muslim region of the world, and bang in the middle is Uzbekistan, a country that I know reasonably well, having done many visits there, a country that endured a lot of persecution until about 5 or 6 years ago, when there was a government change and a new leader became the ruler of Uzbekistan. And the country has opened up a little bit more to the West, and as a Brit, I can now go there, and I don't even need a visa as a tourist. It is an astonishingly beautiful country. It's on the Silk Route, which sounds very romantic, but a lot of it's desert, and you might possibly see an odd camel, but there aren't that many of them around. Let me just take you on a quick journey. Now we've landed in Uzbekistan, so next slide, please. So there you see one of the buildings left from the Soviet times, an iconic building. It's the main hotel, Uzbekistan, in concrete. But actually, in its own way, it's quite a kind of a pretty sort of building, if concrete can ever be pretty. Next slide. And then you've got some beautiful cities on the Silk Route. You've got Samarkand, you've got Khiva, and you've got Bukhara. This is Bukhara, a very beautiful city where there is virtually no gospel witness at all. Next slide. And then if you go further towards the east, you come to beautiful Samarkand with the Registan. And this was originally a university and now very much part of Muslim Islamic history. Next slide. Their famous figure here, their national hero, is Amir Timur. You'll see statues and pictures of him all over. Next slide. And wherever you go, you see amazing architecture and beautiful buildings. But every time I see the mosaics, it just reminds me that I'm in a Muslim country. Until about 2 years ago, the call of prayer was actually illegal in Uzbekistan. I've now noticed, and I haven't seen any laws that have changed, but I am starting to hear the call of prayer. So Islam is on the rise from being maybe a little bit of a background religion to coming to the forefront. Don't misunderstand, they are Muslim, and if you try to say anything different, they'll get very, very angry. Next slide. Again, a picture of Samarkand at night, just to give you an idea of how beautiful the country is. Next one, please. And then, I don't want you to think that these countries are kind of third-rate countries. This was the cradle of civilization. And this astronomer here, Mirza Ulugh Bek, in the 1400s, with his primitive kind of tools, built an observatory and calculated the orbits of the planets around the sun. And he wasn't out by more than about 2 minutes or something like that. So they've got amazing history. But then I want to focus in on the next slide on one particular part of Uzbekistan. You'll see that with the red splodge. So we're going into a semi-autonomous region called Karakalpakstan, just to confuse you. And as we go into Karakalpakstan, we have the Karakalpak people who live there. And as they live there, they live in a land that has been spoilt and damaged. And I'll touch on that in a moment. Uzbekistan has a population of about 35 million. there are less than 7,000 Uzbek believers, and most of them will be found in Tashkent, the capital city, way in the east, or a number will be found in Karakul, Pakistan, which suffered the worst of the persecution, but now has the strongest, although it's incredibly small, the strongest, smallest church in the region. Next slide, please. So if you're wondering, this is Adam's tomb. Now, you didn't know Adam was buried in Uzbekistan, did you? Well, don't believe me, he wasn't. But this is where Islam meets with kind of mysticism. And the story goes that one of Adam's bones was brought here and buried. And so this is Adam's tomb. And once a year, at the start of Ramadan, one of those stones flies off to Mecca. No one's ever seen it. And you can do lots of strange things there. Ladies who want to get pregnant can go through some rituals. Of course, they have to pay money as well. That's always important. But then if we move on to the next slide, we'll also see that we've got a huge pollution problem. You see, in the days of the Soviet Union, this is cotton growing area. And you've got the Amudarya River, which is one of the major rivers of Central Asia, flowing northwards into the Aral Sea. It used to be over a mile wide. It's now about 50 metres wide. And over the years, they've extracted water for cotton growing, but they've done something far worse than just that. In the end of the Soviet years, they put terrible poisonous fertiliser onto the cotton fields. And it's poisoned the water supply. And the Aral Sea has dried up. There you can see a boat on the next slide. You'll see a picture of the Aral Sea from what used to be the shoreline. And you would have to go about 150 miles to find the remaining water. But it does mean that about 1 in 10, 1 in 15 or something like that, children who are born in certain areas are born with deformities. And we've talked a lot today about an honour-shame culture. If you have a child who has a physical problem, in this society they hide it away because it brings shame. And so that's a real problem and a challenge. But then as we move to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the church in Karakul, Pakistan. Now, you'll understand for security reasons, I've had to blank out faces. In fact, the two faces on the right-hand side of the table were students from Oak Hill College who were with me on this particular trip. And don't think this is some kind of home group. This is the church. This is it. So you've got just a few adults, and the man in the foreground with the white top on, he is the pastor of the church. It's illegal because it's an Uzbek-speaking church. The police don't raid as often as they used to, but they still live in fear of a police raid. The church leader here, with his small flock, is first generation Christian, and he's very, very poorly taught himself. He does a full-time job, and then looks after this little group of believers on top of that. They don't have the Christian heritage that we are so privileged to have and often take for granted. They don't have the literature and the books in their own language. In fact, the full version of the Bible in Karakul, Pakistan was only completed about 6 weeks ago. They don't know their Bible very well because they've not been taught it. So a pastor won't teach it well if he's not been taught it. And they have virtually no knowledge of the Old Testament. Let me give you an example. One pastor said to me he had no problem with one of his believing congregation marrying a Muslim. And I wanted to say, what? But he just didn't have that heritage and that thinking and that understanding of what the scriptures say. And so it's a real task to be involved, working alongside church leaders, teaching them, discipling them, and helping them to be the best pastors that they can be for their particular flock. There's also a real problem with violence against women that is prevalent throughout society, and kind of without teaching and discipleship finds its way into the church too. But I love them, and I love going there, and I love teaching the pastors. They never turn up on time. They're always pulling their phones out because they can't leave them. They're kind of worse than teenagers in the UK. But, I've been in one or two really privileged positions. I've been in a room where there have been kind of 15, 20 young people under 30 praising and worshipping God in a secret room with kind of no one around, windows closed, of course, praising and worshiping. No hymn book. They don't have any hymn books. All sung from memory, but passionate about worshipping Christ. Their prayers are full of expectancy. They haven't got the theological knowledge, but they pray with a spirit of expectancy in a way that I wish I could sometimes. And in this particular setting, there is a desperate need for workers to come along and live Christian lives amongst believers in Uzbekistan. A desperate need for teaching. We looked at the percentages earlier, and we saw that there, I think in Uzbekistan it was 0.02% Uzbek Bible-believing Christians. That percentage has fallen in the last 5 years because the population is growing rapidly and the church is not growing at the same proportional rate. And across this country, there is just such a huge need for the gospel. Out of 35 million, I can guarantee you that 34 million will never have heard about the saving work of Jesus Christ. And that brings me on to my last slide. So, the opportunities. Well, I think I've shared something with you about Uzbekistan being an amazing country. I love it. The people are warm, they're welcoming. They want to drink tea with you when you're on a train. They want to share their food with you, which you might not want to touch for hygiene reasons. It's so much safer than travelling in any part of the UK. It's safe to walk through the city at night. They're safe places. And the average age is 28 years old. And the younger generation are desperate to learn English, which is brilliant for someone like me. But there are many opportunities in Central Asia. I've listed one or two there at the bottom. There are opportunities with English language, which is at the front. There are opportunities with tourism, with business, with microloans, many opportunities. And we are urgently looking for hundreds of new workers. This is a silly statistic, but it makes a point. If we had 10,000 workers for Central Asia, that would only be one for 50,000 population. The job of mission in Central Asia and other parts of the world has only just begun. Friends, it's not finished. There's a task. And we've heard about so many people who are unreached. How can that be at this point in the 21st century? And what are we going to do about it? We're actively recruiting for Central Asia and praying that God would raise up a whole army of people to go. We've talked about resources. Please make sure you take some maps, take some back for those in your church. Sign up to get a regular update that will encourage you to pray. And please help us to put Central Asia onto the agenda of the UK Church, because it breaks my heart with so many millions who've never heard the best news in the world, a Saviour, Jesus Christ. Thank you.